Your ego is not your enemy. But when you try to step into a new self-concept, oh, it fights back. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. But today, we're pulling back the curtain on 3 ego traps that are blocking your evolution. So you can stop playing small and finally become the version of you that's already waiting. Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena, I'm a somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I support women in bridging the gap between who they currently are or who they perceive themselves to be and who they desire to be or become, so that you can break even the most persistent, deep-rooted patterns in your life, in your relationships, in your circumstances, in recurring emotions, and that you can finally step into the version of you and the reality that you desire and deserve. Today we're talking about the ego because you might be familiar with the experience of you're actively working on changing your self-concept, meaning you know you've got the potential for more. You have desires. And you're working on becoming the version of you who believes that more is possible for her, who sees herself as capable and worthy, and who finds that reality that she wants more natural than maybe the one you're currently finding yourself in. But despite trying to work on that, you continue feeling blocked. You feel stuck in an old identity, a version of yourself that no longer resonates, or that you no longer want to associate with. It could even be the case that you do make some progress, because we're not the same every day anyway, but then you revert back. Now, what often happens is that your ego is blocking you from your evolution. It blocks you from who you're wanting to become and from leaving your comfort zone. Let's explore in this video a brief intro into the nature of the ego and how it works and how it's created. 3 distinct ways in which your ego fights back the moment you evolve your self-concept. Why it does this, because it's really annoying, and how to navigate this so that you can finally meet the version of yourself that you've been wanting to step into. So I started this video by saying your ego is not your enemy, because we need to be careful not to villainize the ego. If we explore today how your ego blocks your self-concept transformation, how it sabotages you, then it's important that we don't turn it into something we fight, even when it feels like our ego is fighting us. Because your ego isn't bad. We all have one. We all need one. Your ego is created from a very early age, and it is created unconsciously for the most part. You are told what your name is and who you belong to. You are told what you believe is right or wrong. You are told what you should or shouldn't have or want. You are told who you can or can't be. Most of these things you don't consciously decide unless you're really aware of it, especially as a child. This is given to you. And those last 2 I mentioned, who you can or can't be or what you can or can't have, that's usually what holds us back the most, because they are rooted in messages you receive, but they are also partly rooted in trauma responses. For example, experiences that you've had that left an emotional mark on you, that created a rupture inside of you, and that therefore created beliefs in you that you no longer want to have. And that also aren't true. Just because you believe something doesn't mean it's true. Your environment shapes your ego. The era or time you're born into shapes your ego. The messages of the zeitgeist essentially shape your ego too. But the thing is, once it's locked into place, it's pretty stubborn. And because it's so deeply rooted in your identity, in who you think you are, it makes it pretty hard to change your self-concept from there. Your ego will resist change. Always. It will resist you moving out of your comfort zone, stepping into new versions of yourself and realities, because that's not safe for the ego. That's not known. That's not what it attaches to. Ego resistance can sound like, I've already done this, I don't even care, or I know everything already. Or it can also look like, I can't do this anyway, it's gonna fail anyway, what's even the point? Do any of these sound familiar? Let me know in the comments if they do. But let's break down 3 ways that your ego fights back when you are actively working on changing your self-concept, and why these 3 ways are sneakier than you think. Firstly, you can spiritualize the work on your self-concept. That's the ego's doing. So this can look like overanalyzing everything, your external circumstances, constantly looking outside of yourself for proof that what you're doing is working, analyzing your emotions or patterns, constantly rethinking your past and getting stuck in outdated assumptions. It can also look like spinning a spiritual meaning onto everything rather than actually dealing with the emotions underneath, because that's uncomfortable. So when you're saying you're surrendering and trusting the process, you might actually be operating from your ego rather than from your soul, as you might believe. Now, this variation of the ego is the so-called spiritual ego. That's what we like to call it. It's rooted in a very common ego pattern, namely superiority thinking. Because the ego will do one of two things. It will make itself superior or inferior, and the ego will jump on anything. So discovering your own spirituality can just be another gateway for the ego to jump ship and make itself important. Because that's what the ego wants. It wants to stand out. It wants to be special. It wants to set itself apart. The second way is that it can minimize your desires or the future version of you that you want to embody. It can make it less important. This is essentially a denial of your desires. And it can sound like, I don't want it that much anyway, I don't really care. When really you do care. It's like your ego whispers, you don't even want that anymore. But that's not because you don't, but because the cost of potential disappointment or failure feels too big to risk. So you don't even try, or you don't continue trying. There can also be an energy of self-loathing or self-judgment. You can either judge yourself for the desires you have, feeling like you shouldn't want this or they are too big, which is what you've been taught, and that's why your ego holds on to that. I spoke about how we settle without even knowing that we do in last week's video, so if you haven't seen that, I'm gonna link that in the description box below for you. Or you can also judge yourself for not being where you want to be yet. You can wonder, why have I not gotten there yet? What am I doing wrong? That's also the ego talking. And then we have the I already know this voice. This can look like hyper-independence. Remember, the ego wants to set itself apart. It can look like a resistance to being led and guided and supported, because that alone can be uncomfortable. And I often hear this from women who feel that they should be able to do this alone. Like they'll fail if they're not able to create this shift in their self-concept themselves. But asking for help is not a failure, it's actually a sign of power. I had to learn this the hard way too. I wouldn't be where I am today, or who I am, if I had tried to do it all myself. And for a long time, I actually did try to do it all myself, and it didn't get me anywhere. It didn't get me very far. It only kept me stuck. And my clients will say the exact same thing. They have only gotten to the point they've gotten to because they allowed themselves to choose themselves, to invest in themselves, to ask for help. If you're too stubborn, that can be a voice from the ego, and it can be exactly what keeps you stuck where you currently are. And you can also stay stuck in familiarity, mostly because you're scared, and the ego does operate pretty much exclusively from fear. It's literally its purpose to help you survive, so it's driven by fear, right? Your ego is the reason you jump out of the way when there's a train coming. And this can also manifest as I've already done enough, rather than just I already know it all. Maybe because you've done a lot of research, right? We've got infinite amounts of information almost at our fingertips in this day and age. You can read all the books, you can listen to all the podcasts, you can ask ChatGPT for things. But just because you have information, or you've done a lot of therapy, or have even had some coaching or taken some courses, doesn't mean you've already done it all. You need to remember that people can be in therapy for decades without ever changing. I have seen this sadly in so many people. And people can also try a million different things that don't work. And just because they've tried a million different things doesn't mean that that should be a reason to stop, because maybe it's the next thing. Maybe there's this one thing they haven't tried that interrupts the pattern for good. That's not what the ego wants to say. The ego wants to keep you comfortable. The ego wants to keep you in what you've already known and tried, and it wants to keep you exactly where you are. Let me know where you notice your ego holding you back the most. Drop it in the comments, I would love to hear. So let's dive into why the ego even shows up like this. Why does it fight back in these 3 specific ways? Now, firstly, the fear element means it wants to stay in a comfort zone, which is such an ironic word or phrase anyway, because it's really not comfortable to be in your comfort zone. but it's what it's used to, and therefore it feels safe, even when it keeps you stuck, unhappy, disappointed, or small. So yeah, it wants to be safe, and it also wants to be right. It would actually rather be right than be happy, because being right keeps the identity intact. And that's literally the way the ego survives. The ego doesn't survive when you question it. It collapses when you question it. And that's when it gets shaky and it tries to fight and resist. And with that, we also have an element of pride in order to save face, which is where this "I already know this" voice comes from. Again, keeping up the appearances is to keep up the identity, to keep up the ego so that it doesn't collapse, because collapse means death, and the ego doesn't want to die. The problem with all this is that you're not going to be the same all the time. It's human nature to change and evolve, always trying to keep up the status quo, even if that's unconsciously or unintentionally. It's not authentic and it doesn't get you what you want. Now, how do we resolve this? We don't want to turn the ego into the enemy, but we also don't want to be at its mercy. So, how do we navigate the ego? First things first, don't resist it. If you resist it, it will just get louder. You will notice that every time you propose a new pattern, you propose a new way of living, of being, of behaving, or you make a decision that brings you towards your edge, that feels scary, that takes a leap of faith, your ego will arise to fight. And when it comes up to fight, let it fight. Now, obviously, in order to do this, you need to recognize when it arises. In parts, this comes down to absolute, radical, complete honesty and really becoming aware of your patterns and taking responsibility for them. That's not easy to do on your own, but you can practice becoming conscious of it at least. Now, because it's not easy to do on your own, though, get help. You can't see your ego on your own all the time. You can't see everything on your own. No one can. Now, I will say this will require you to be discerning with who you even get help from, because we are talking about the ego. For example, in my coaching program, Recreate Yourself, we do a lot of ego integration. We do a lot of shadow integration. It's one of the biggest parts of the process of self-concept transformation that I teach my clients, because those parts are the exact parts that are stopping you from evolving. When you're changing your self-concept, you're not necessarily adding anything new, you're removing what's already in the way. And if you do feel called to work with me, then I've linked Recreate Yourself in the description box below for you to check out. And if you want a taste of what we do in there and how you can work with your ego, get some practical tips, I've linked my free subconscious reprogramming masterclass in the description box too. But whether you choose to work with me or with someone else, I feel obliged to tell you that, especially in the spiritual space, the ego of practitioners and coaches and therapists can get in the way too. No one is above it, right? So whilst a skilled and trained practitioner can help you see things and parts of yourself that you might not be able to see, you always need to make sure that you get someone who also keeps their own ego in check, because we all have one. And with the trainings I've done myself, I've always found it most important that those trainings would enable me to not project my own shit onto my clients, because it's so easy to do. So just be aware of that. The truth is, you don't need to believe more. You just need to clear what's blocking you from already believing. Your ego's not bad, it's just scared. But if you want the life you say you're ready for, you've got to stop letting your fear of change lead your identity and your decisions. You don't need to fight your ego, you just need to learn to lead it. If you like this video, make sure you check out the playlist that I have linked beside my head, which dives into the question, is the manifestation community a cult? Because this will help you practice discernment in the self-concept and manifestation space, so that when you get support, you get the right support for you, and you can avoid falling into the traps that many women, including myself in a past life, fall into. And it's also a really fun and interesting series. So let me know what landed the most with you from this video, and then I will see you next week.